Throughout history, wars have not only been decided by weapons, but by how soldiers were arranged on the battlefield. Long before guns and tanks existed, infantry formations determined victory or defeat. Among all formations ever used, one stands above the rest in terms of discipline, killing power, and battlefield dominance. That formation was the Macedonian Phalanx. The Phalanx did not originally begin with Alexander the Great. Earlier versions were used by Greek city-states such as Sparta, where heavily armored hoplites fought shoulder to shoulder. These formations relied on unity and pressure, pushing forward as a solid mass. However, while effective, they were limited in reach and flexibility. Everything changed under King Philip II of Macedon. He completely reformed the Macedonian army, turning it into a professional fighting force. Training became constant and brutal. Soldiers were conditioned to fight as one body rather than as individuals. Discipline was absolute. Philip did not simply improve the phalanx, he perfected it. Throughout history, wars have never been decided by weapons alone. Long before firearms, artillery, and machines of modern warfare, victory depended on how soldiers stood, moved, and fought together on the battlefield. Infantry formations were the heart of ancient armies, and the way men were organized often mattered more than individual strength or courage. Among all infantry formations ever used, one stands above the rest in terms of discipline, lethality, and historical impact. That formation was the Macedonian Phalanx. The concept of the phalanx existed long before Macedon rose to power. Greek city-states such as Sparta and Athens had already used tightly packed infantry formations known as hoplite phalanxes. These soldiers carried heavy shields and spears and advanced shoulder to shoulder, forming a solid wall of bronze and wood. This method of fighting relied on unity, physical pressure, and collective strength. While effective, these early phalanxes were slow, limited in reach, and vulnerable to more flexible enemies. The transformation of the phalanx into the deadliest infantry formation in history began under Philip II of Macedon. Philip understood that warfare was changing and that discipline, training, and innovation could overcome traditional methods. He reorganized the Macedonian army into a professional standing force, something rare in the ancient world. Soldiers trained year-round instead of being temporary militia. They drilled endlessly, learning to move, turn, advance, and fight as a single unified body. Philip's greatest innovation was the introduction of the sarissa. This enormous pike measured between 18 and 22 feet in length, far longer than any spear used by Macedon's enemies. The sarissa required both hands to wield, forcing soldiers to rely entirely on formation discipline rather than individual defense. Shields were reduced in size and strapped to the arm, allowing soldiers to maintain control of their massive weapons. When deployed in battle, the Macedonian phalanx formed deep, compact ranks, often 16 men deep. The first 5 rows lowered their sarissas forward, creating multiple overlapping layers of spear points. This turned the front of the formation into a deadly barrier that enemies could not penetrate. Any soldier charging the phalanx faced instant death long before reaching striking distance. The killing power of the formation was overwhelming. Enemy infantry could not close the gap. Cavalry horses refused to charge into walls of spear points. Even heavily armored troops were pierced through shields, armor, and flesh. The phalanx did not need to chase enemies. It simply advanced steadily, pushing forward like an unstoppable machine. Beyond its physical lethality, the psychological impact of the Macedonian phalanx was devastating. The sight of hundreds of long pikes advancing in perfect order shattered morale. Many battles were decided before contact was made, as enemy formations broke under fear and confusion. Soldiers knew that once trapped against the spear wall, escape was nearly impossible. Under Alexander the Great, the Macedonian phalanx reached its ultimate form. Alexander inherited not just an army, but a perfected system of warfare. He understood the strengths and limitations of the phalanx and used it with extraordinary intelligence. Rather than relying on it alone, he combined it with cavalry, archers, and light infantry in coordinated attacks. In Alexander's battles, the phalanx served as the anvil. It fixed the enemy in place, absorbing pressure and denying movement. While enemy forces struggled against the spear wall, Alexander personally led elite cavalry units around the flanks. These cavalry charges struck with devastating force, collapsing enemy lines from the sides and rear. Once surrounded, opposing armies were destroyed. This strategy crushed forces many times larger than Alexander's own. At Issus and Gaugamela, Persian armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands were shattered. Casualties were catastrophic. Entire formations were wiped out, and enemy resistance collapsed completely. The Macedonian army marched forward again and again, conquering territories from Greece to Egypt, Persia, and deep into Central Asia. Despite its terrifying effectiveness, the Macedonian phalanx was not invincible. It required flat, open terrain to function properly. Uneven ground disrupted formation cohesion. If attacked from the sides or rear without support, the phalanx could be vulnerable. These weaknesses became more apparent after Alexander's death, when less skilled commanders failed to coordinate combined arms effectively. Eventually, more flexible forces such as the Roman legions learned how to defeat phalanx-based armies. Roman soldiers fought in smaller units, used short swords, and exploited gaps in rigid formations. Still, defeating a properly supported phalanx remained extremely difficult and costly. The legacy of the Macedonian phalanx is permanent. It demonstrated that discipline, training, and organization could dominate the battlefield. It proved that infantry, when unified and properly led, could destroy empires and reshape the world. Many principles of modern military doctrine, unit cohesion, formation control, and combined arms warfare, can be traced directly back to this ancient formation. The Macedonian phalanx was more than a method of fighting. It was a revolution in warfare. With its unmatched reach, relentless discipline, and overwhelming psychological impact, it stands as the deadliest infantry formation in history. Long after the last sarissa fell silent, its influence continues to echo through the study of war and the story of human conflict. The greatest innovation of the Macedonian phalanx was its primary weapon, the sarissa. This massive pike measured between 18 and 22 feet in length, making it far longer than any spear used by enemy forces. When held by disciplined soldiers standing in deep ranks, the battlefield transformed into a forest of deadly spear points. In combat, the first 5 rows of soldiers extended their sarissas forward at the same time. This meant an enemy charging the formation faced multiple layers of spear tips before ever reaching the first line of men. Most opponents were stabbed or impaled long before they could strike back. The psychological effect alone was devastating. The formation itself was arranged in tight, deep ranks, usually 16 men deep. Each soldier relied completely on the men beside him. Individual heroics were irrelevant. Survival depended on cohesion. Shields were smaller and strapped to the arm, allowing soldiers to grip the massive sarissa with both hands. Armor was lighter than that of earlier hoplites, enabling greater stamina and mobility over long campaigns. What made the Macedonian phalanx truly deadly was not just its weapons, but its discipline. Soldiers trained relentlessly to march, turn, and fight in perfect unison. Even under heavy pressure, the formation maintained its shape. From the front, it was nearly impossible to break. Enemies often collapsed before direct contact was even made. Charging into an advancing wall of spear points shattered morale. Fear spread rapidly through opposing ranks, as soldiers realized they could not get close enough to fight back. Under Alexander the Great, The Macedonian phalanx reached its peak effectiveness. Alexander used it not as a blunt weapon, but as part of a larger tactical system. The phalanx acted as an anvil, fixing enemy forces in place. While the enemy struggled against the spear wall, Alexander led elite cavalry units around the flanks, delivering crushing blows to exposed sides and rear positions. This combination proved unstoppable. Massive armies were defeated by smaller Macedonian forces. At battles such as Issus and Gaugamela, Persian troops were slaughtered in overwhelming numbers. Entire enemy formations collapsed once their lines broke, leading to devastating casualties. Meanwhile, Macedonian losses remained comparatively low. However, the phalanx was not without weaknesses. It required flat, open terrain to function effectively. Uneven ground, forests or hills could disrupt its tight formation. If attacked from the sides or rear without proper support, it could be overwhelmed. Later armies, particularly the Roman legions, learned to exploit these weaknesses using flexible formations and close combat tactics. Despite this, the legacy of the Macedonian phalanx is undeniable. It demonstrated that discipline, organization, and coordination could defeat superior numbers. It proved that infantry, when perfectly trained and properly supported, could dominate the battlefield and build empires. Even in modern warfare, the principles behind the phalanx still exist. Unit cohesion, combined arms tactics, and disciplined formations remain central to military doctrine. Though the spears are gone, the lessons remain. The Macedonian phalanx was more than a military formation. It was a revolution in warfare. With its massive reach, unbreakable discipline, and terrifying effectiveness, it stands as the deadliest infantry formation in history. It conquered kingdoms, destroyed empires, and allowed a single army to change the course of the ancient world forever.